This is Bruce Soloway for the Public Affairs Department. About 2 weeks ago, a segment was deleted from the Great American Dream Machine on national educational television. The segment was a special report on FBI informers. One of the men, David Sanis, was in our studio this afternoon for a lengthy interview, which we'll be playing for you in just a moment. In the report produced for NET, David Sanis stood near a bridge in Seattle, Washington, and described how he was directed by FBI agents to instigate and participate in a plan to blow up the bridge, and how the FBI wanted him to have one of the radicals involved in the plot also to be killed. He said after that incident, he severed his relationship with the FBI. Today I spoke to Sanis, beginning with his first contact with the FBI.
I spoke with Special Agent Lewis Harris of the Seattle office of the FBI on the morning of 27 April 1970. In that conversation, many hours, I told him about my background in counterintelligence, my work for the National Security Agency, and we agreed that I would become a penetration agent into the radical movement in the city of Seattle, specifically targeting on two areas: the Seattle 8 defense, which I had access to through one of my employees in a nightclub, who was a roommate of several of the indicted members, and that I would utilize my knowledge of explosives and incendiaries to pose as a potential bomber and attempt to penetrate radical bombing groups.
Well, what has led to your decision not to continue with the FBI and, in fact, to reveal much of the classified secret information which you acquired working for them?
Well, I went into a relationship as an undercover operative for the FBI under the assumption that I would be seeking out to bring to trial individuals who were engaged in political bombings. I was advised by the FBI that members of the Seattle 8 conspiracy were in fact such people. I went in to try and get information that would lead to indictments and conviction against such people for bombing. After I had been in the FBI a number of months and had performed with some success for them, I was instructed to begin actually seeking people out to conduct bombings and actually be an individual who would lead a series of bombings. That struck me as slightly unconstitutional. I was also involved in an FBI agent-directed conspiracy to obstruct justice in 3 important radical cases in the Seattle area. And that seemed a little odd, specifically that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, sworn to uphold the Constitution and Bill of Rights, was systematically attempting to obstruct justice, to defy the provisions of the Bill of Rights, etc., in 3 important cases. And I gradually gained enough information to realize that, at least in the Seattle area, the FBI was conducting a campaign of bombing and terrorism, and that they wanted me to join.
I want to get into those 3 cases, but before I do, I think it's important to ask you about why I should believe what you're telling me. What evidence do you have that you actually did work for the FBI as an undercover agent, and that what all this information is valid?
Well, there is the entire crux of it. Why should anyone believe me? And I think that's the most pertinent question. Very specifically, I would like to state that U.S. Attorney Stan Pitkin in Seattle admitted to members of the press and has become published widely in Seattle on television and newspapers and in the area. On May 25th, 1971, Stan Pitkin admitted that I had been an undercover operative of the FBI during the time period that I described, that I had been codenamed TJ, had a dead letter drop, I had all the other paraphernalia of an undercover espionage agent. He has admitted that, although he has since regretted it, that admission. The FBI, of course, has refused to comment. But Stan Pitkin, on May 25th, when he spoke to the press, purported to be quoting from an FBI report to him, the U.S. Attorney, to that effect. The FBI denied, however, engaging in any criminal conduct, but that again is rather obvious. But specifically in regard to my allegations of obstruction of justice, I am confessing, and I have in an affidavit, and I will under oath, in the Longview bombing case trial, which is upcoming November 2nd, that is next Tuesday, I will be confessing on the witness stand to obstruction of justice on behalf of Agents Burt Carter and Lewis Harris of the Seattle office of the FBI in that case, specifically clandestinely overhearing client-attorney relations, reporting it to them on a specified date, October 5th, 1970. There is defense testimony that the conversations that I overheard actually did take place from UCLA law professor Michael Tiger, ACLU attorney Michael Rosen. The contacts with the FBI have been admitted by the U.S. Attorney, Stan Pitkin, and you have the documents here in the studio in front of you. They have appeared also in National Education Television, NBC News. Secondly, there is the entire area, the fact that also in the stand I am going to be confessing, without benefit of federal immunity, it should be noted, not only to obstruction of justice, but to conspiracy to incite riot for the FBI, specifically on May 6, 1970, an incident that's been covered by the local Seattle press. I am also going to be admitting on the stand, detailing conspiracy to bomb, conspiracy to commit felony murder for the FBI in the Evergreen Point Bridge bombing conspiracy. It's very tough to deny. You'd have to take it either way. These are matters, all of which I have forced into court at great attempts to delay and so forth by the federal government. Either I perjure myself and get sentenced to federal penitentiary, or my testimony is upheld by expert witnesses, as I believe it will be, and I can be indicted for a series of criminal acts that carry a top penalty of over 100 years when combined. And I think that's a pretty strong basis in itself. But moreover, Officer David Franklin, a local Seattle officer of the police, has upheld my testimony in affidavits and interviews with Paul Jacobs, which appeared on National Education Television, John Kiffner in the New York Times, and others. Two other police officers also acted as intermediaries when we're completely aware of the conspiracy to bomb, conspiracy to commit felony murder that occurred in October, November of last year in Seattle. So I think with police officer testimony, with the testimony of ACLU attorneys, UCLA law professor Michael Tiger, and a great variety of other people, that it will be very, very clear indeed.
I'd like to go back and trace your involvement in intelligence work from the very first experience you had, which I guess was in the Army in 1965 or 1966. Can you start there? How did you get into that?
Right. I was drafted into the Army on July 26, 1965. Approximately October 4th, 1965, I found that I'd been further drafted by the National Security Agency.
Which is?
The National Security Agency has responsibility for all strategic communications of all military and non-military intelligence agencies and classified messages of the military itself. In other words, it handles the coded message system and the security of that system around the world of all American forces, civilian and military.
You know why you were selected to work with the NSA?
On a basis of test scores and entrance tests when I entered the United States Army as a draftee.
What kind of information did you deal with in your counterintelligence work in the Army?
Well, initially I was trained in the United States to be a passive counterintelligence agent, that is, one trained to handle the security from from the inside, not against foreign agents, etc., necessarily, but simply to check on the loyalty of people who operated the classified communications equipment, to deliver and keep track of all the codes that we had, and all the coded equipment, etc., to guard, to check, be responsible for the security, that is physical security and otherwise, of communication centers that handle classified traffic and so forth. I then spent 2 years in Vietnam, primarily assigned to that type of work, guarding the physical security of communication sites in central Vietnam, checking on loyalty of the people who operated, reliability, etc., of the people who operated the sites, delivering codes, delivering classified communications equipment and so forth, and guarding its security.
How high was the level of secrecy to which you were privileged?
I had to have top secret cryptographic access at all times. And as you have a document in front of you that states that I relinquished that clearance and was debriefed from top secret cryptographic materials 4 days before I honorably was separated from the United States Army.
Now, after that separation, I gather you spent a couple of years outside of the field of intelligence work.
Right. From February of '68 until April of 1970, I was engaged as an engineer at the Boeing Company in Seattle and as a designer, builder, operator of nightclubs.
You had some training in physics and chemistry?
Yes.
That was
and science and university. I attended the University of Washington for a little under 4 years in high school physics and chemistry, and I've always been a student of various academic disciplines on my own.
Mm-hmm. Now let's go back to April 27th, 1970, which is the first time that you had some kind of return to the field of intelligence, but now domestically rather than in the armed services.
Because of my contact through my friendship with a member of the household in which most of the Seattle 8 conspirators lived, and because of my knowledge of explosives and incendiary devices, I was assigned by Agent Lewis Harris to become a radical, to slowly become more and more left in my political philosophy, finally to become an individual advocating violence as an answer to the need for changes politically in our country.
I've jumped the gun. Let's go back to the day on which Chip Marshall was arrested.
All right.
That's the first step I want to take.
This was the first encounter with intelligence again, actually, right. It occurred by chance, basically. I was in a position to know where a fugitive very badly wanted by the FBI was. I, as a citizen, thinking that I was helping to arrest the bomber, phoned the Federal Bureau of Investigation, set up his capture. That is the capture of Chip Marshall.
What were the circumstances surrounding that?
I knew that he would be at a Century Tavern in Seattle at 5 o'clock in the afternoon because I was close enough to overhear his conversation with my tavern employee. And I went to the tavern after telephoning the FBI and informing him that I had reason to believe that Chip Marshall would be at a tavern in half an hour. And which tavern? I went there to the tavern, ascertained his presence, and called the FBI and set up the arrest at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on April 18th of Chip Marshall.
April 18th. Now, it was 9 days later
that you
contacted the FBI again.
That I again contacted the FBI, told them I might have additional information for them that would be of interest concerning members of the Seattle 8, told them of my contact with one of the individuals who lived in the Sundance Collective House that housed 5 of the members of the Seattle 8 conspiracy, was invited down to FBI headquarters, talked with Lewis Harris, who was case agent of the Seattle 8 case, for several hours after he reviewed my military counterintelligence background, etc. He very happily made me a member of the FBI's undercover informant corps. And my job was to become a radical, as I mentioned, etc., and engage in surveillance activities. Initially, my presumption was that would lead to indictments, convictions for bombing and such like crimes.
When you became an informant for the FBI, what were the logistical, operative things that you had to learn? Did you receive at that point a code name and a Dropbox?
Immediately,
and so
I
forth?
was set up right with a code name TJ, with a dead Dropbox, so that I would never make contact in person with an FBI agent again, and we would never come near each other. Set up with codes to use in the event that I was in severe trouble and it was in severe danger to my life, and they had similar codes by which to contact me in the event that they had knowledge that there was great danger to my life.
What's a dead Dropbox?
That is a box, in this case a post office box, where I would receive information from Agent Lewis Harris or other members of the FBI, and I had a box that I would mail everything to for him, so that we would never contact each other. When we picked each other's messages up, we'd use a post office.
Were you armed?
Most of the time, yes.
Your first step after receiving this code name and receiving your assignment from the FBI was to do what? What was your first infiltration?
The first thing that I did, basically, was attempt to establish a more radical line. I'd been a political liberal, and this is April 27th is when I became an undercover agent. It was within 4 days in the same week that the Cambodia invasion occurred, an event which was a great radicalizer of hundreds of thousands of people across the country. I utilized that as a vehicle for political radicalization, and even more utilized the Kent State killings as a reinforcement to that radicalization. Began to be very active in all the demonstrations in and around Seattle, began to act as an agitator, as an activist in these demonstrations, specifically on Wednesday, May 6th, 1970, in front of the mayoralty's office in the city of Seattle, acting as an agent provocateur, attempting to incite riot, and narrowly escaping arrest.
In what way did you try to incite riot?
I shouted down the acting mayor, Charles M. Carroll, of the city of Seattle, in an obscene speech, and screamed for people to kill the pigs, so forth.
How big was that crowd?
Approximately 10,000 people.
Do you believe there were other people in the crowd who were doing the same thing you were, acting as agent provocateurs?
There were certainly other agent provocateurs. I ran into one later who had been with Lewis Harris in the famous courthouse trashing, and that is with Lewis Harris, the FBI agent, and was throwing rocks with them through downtown business windows in the city of Seattle.
Mm.
And this is the only one that I know of, Jeff Desmond, who has since surfaced, and who has confessed to 2 bombings for the FBI, one of which he was caught in the act of, and let off without ever being indicted.
When you performed this first act of provocation, agitation, was that part of the instructions you had received from Agent Harris?
Very definitely. I was to become a individual who would have credibility as a radical, and to become more and more radical in action, to begin to advocate violent political answers, etc. I passed out formulas for the making of various types of explosive incendiary devices, making of various types of poisonous gases. I told them how to get bacillus for pneumatic bubonic plague type thing, so forth like that, and how to culture it. A lot of other things. If anybody seemed interested in violent solutions, I was out advocating, telling them how to do it, and hoping to get people to want to become involved in it.
When you first got your orders, or at least had this discussion with Agent Harris, was the discussion confined at that point to collecting information, or was it clear at that point that part of your responsibility would be to provoke illegal actions?
Well, it was my understanding from the outset that I would have to become involved in actually committing some illegal actions in order to gain credibility as a revolutionary. It was not my understanding at the outset, however, that I would actually be recruiting people to commit bombings that would be carried through with, as later became the case.
So at this point, your acting as an agitator was primarily to gain credibility.
To gain sufficient cover as a revolutionary to be able to penetrate and stop bombing conspiracies.
What were your other activities early on in your association with the F.B.I.?
Well, some of the other activities that specifically might be touched upon here are ones I think most profitably discussed, are ones that are subject to court action right now. Mm-hmm. And specifically, I infiltrated, after gaining some credibility over a period of months as a radical with violent tendencies, I penetrated the defense of the Seattle 8, one of whose members I had caused to have arrested. And from September 27th until October 8th, I, on a daily basis, was able to go down to the defense offices to be able to be in a position where of acceptance and so forth in that office, where I could clandestinely and illegally rifle a locked file in one case and get an idea of what kind of defenses specifically were planned for specific members of the conspiracy. An alibi defense, for instance, in the case of two individuals, Roger Lippman and Joseph Kelly, and so on and so forth. And I was able to clandestinely overhear, and sometimes not so clandestinely overhear, client-attorney conversations. I attempted to engage members of the defense collective in criminal conspiracies, and so forth. And my affidavit in this case alleging these activities, and supported by about a dozen other affidavits of a wide variety of attorneys and so forth in that case, is now before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco as part of a motion to dismiss contempt citations against the Seattle 7 and all other charges against him on the grounds of federal conspiracy to violate due process, to obstruct justice, and deny their right to counsel.
How did you go about infiltrating this office? How does somebody who's working for the FBI present himself to a group that he's trying to infiltrate?
Well, by that time, that is in September of 70, I had become known as a regular at demonstrations in all types of political causes of the radical left. I had become an active worker in any type of event, attempted to act in a fundraising capacity by that time, and was generally accepted as a radical at that point. I had ceased my association with nightclubs and any other straight type of occupation, and was thought to be just a radical street person.
How about dealing with the people you were watching on a personal level?
Well, basically, I attempted to become involved as little as possible on a personal level and attempt to involve them as much as possible on a business level. That is my business, involving them in criminal conspiracies of one kind or another, appealing to them through their primary needs, fundraising and publicity for the trial. And so I attempted to engage them in criminal conspiracies of the obstruction of justice sort that would gain them publicity for the trial, such as inside the courtroom disruptions, outside the courtroom disruptions and demonstrations of even a violent nature and so forth, and finally attempted to promote the false kidnapping of one of the members of the Seattle 8, and finally unsuccessfully. But this was...
Why don't you talk a little bit more about that idea?
Right. What we intended to do was what I attempted to encourage one of the individuals at the Seattle 8 offices, a man who has sworn out affidavits to that effect along with other supportive affidavits from other people in that case, but to convince this individual that one of the defendants, Chip Marshall, should be fraudulently kidnapped, with or without Marshall's knowledge, held for 3 days, with the appearance that it would be a right-wing kidnapping. At the end of that time, the FBI, after the Seattle 7 had gained considerable press coverage for having one of their members be kidnapped, the FBI would solve the kidnapping, though, on the other side, and come in and act as great exposers of a left-wing revolutionary plot that had them sinking to a new low, so that J. Edgar Hoover could announce that the radicals had sunk to a new low and disgusting moral degenerate level by staging a fraudulent kidnapping and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And that they had been brought to justice very speedily.
There again, you were an agent provocateur.
There again, I was definitely an agent provocateur for the FBI.
Right. Let me quote from an affidavit that one of the people who worked for that defense committee wrote. David Sanas first appeared as a volunteer on or about September 27th, 1970. He had a very aggressive, outspoken manner about him, which was evident from the moment he introduced himself. This tended to cause personal dislike and mistrust among those collective members in the office. Although conversations between the staff and the office included the possibility of David being a police agent, the idea was discarded early for 3 reasons. 1, his obvious straight appearance and manner. Police agents normally attempt to adopt a cover to blend in. 2, a telephone call from a mutual acquaintance of David's and ours, a certain Jan Peterson, who told one of our members David was a good worker and anxious to help, that she would vouch for him. And finally, some believed naively, as it turned out later, that no agency of the government would go so far as to attempt to gain defense information in such an obviously unconstitutional and illegal manner. So David Sanas was reluctantly accepted as an eccentric of sorts who had a never-ending flow of suggestions and ideas on just about any matter we were concerning ourselves with. Maybe you could elaborate on what your behavior was like in that office and why you chose to behave in the way you did.
Well, basically what I was attempting to do was demonstrate that although I was a very unusual individual, maybe they should be cautious of me, that it was just simply not possible, that it was just simply something that they did not have to imagine. They could not imagine me as working for the FBI or any other police agency. And then what I wanted to do was give them so many good ideas and bad ideas that they would constantly be in consultation with me about ideas, and so that I could develop just simply a working relationship with them. I did not want to have a personal relationship that would require me to be too heavily interrogated as to my own ideas and politics. I wanted to attempt to avoid that type of thing because I was not absolutely versed in every type of radical phraseology and so forth. And so to avoid that area, I concentrated on positive suggestions for actions of a wide variety, so that when I did make political mistakes, when I did suggest things that were chauvinist or something like that they would regard it, well, he's an eccentric.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I could cover any mistake by simply a massive flow of ideas and suggestions, some of which they in fact utilized and had to regard as good, so that they just simply know that could not be anything but what he seems to be, and that must be an eccentric, because I had considerable trouble with all the ins and outs of a radical political thinking.
Mm-hmm. How long were you working in that office, the Defense Committee office?
Approximately 10 days.
And during that time, I gather you were privy to information about other cases than the Seattle 8
right.
conspiracy.
Besides the federal appeal now before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. In the Seattle 8 case, there is my affidavit detailing my involvement in clandestinely overhearing client-attorney conversations, that is, on October 5th, 1970, between Longview bombing attorney Michael Tiger and some of the Longview bombing defendants, during the course of which...
What about that bombing? What was the incident there?
That was an incident approximately May 1970 in which 5 people were indicted of blowing up Army trucks at the Longview, Washington Armory. And in their discussions, which were held in the same offices as the defense collective for the Seattle 8.
These are discussions between the defendants and their defense lawyers.
Right, concerning strategy and tactics in that trial. I was able to overhear confession of guilt of the individuals to their attorney and his statement to them not to say that ever again to anybody and so forth.
What did you do with that information?
I turned it over in an oral report to Special Agent Bert Carter on October 12, 1970, in a meeting unwisely enough admitted to by U.S. Attorney Stan Pitkin in his one statement. Since that time, of course, the F.B.I. and the U.S. Attorney have simply had no comments after that one tremendous error.
So that was the context in which Pitkin actually confirmed, in effect, that you were working for the FBI,
right? He
were infiltrating.
Confirmed not in effect,
groups.
but very directly.
Yeah,
and a very unwise statement. At that time, he was obviously not in full command of the facts, and unwisely believed a fraudulent FBI report to him.
The one other case that you overheard conversations about was the Mayday 8
right.
group.
I should point out, in the Longview bombing case, that is where a hearing, right now, that the status of that legally is that a hearing is going to be held November 2nd, unless it is again delayed by the federal government, as it has been since the middle of July, but is on the court calendar in federal court in Seattle for November 2nd. But should that occur, what is going to be the reason for it is my affidavit alleging conspiracy to obstruct justice. If that affidavit is upheld, the individual defendant will have charges against him dismissed in the bombing indictment. The 4 people who have already been sentenced in that bombing will have their convictions overturned. The testimony of myself, by the way, is supported by 3 police officers in the city of Seattle who are currently still working as police officers. A lieutenant of police, a chief, and a patrolman. David Franklin, Richard Hoftelling, and Michael Shanahan. All were privy to discussions that occurred around this area and were privy to information in a conspiracy to bomb and conspiracy to commit felony murder as late as the 5th of December of last year, so can establish my relationship with the FBI through their involvement as intermediaries in a conspiracy to bomb, etc.
Will they be testifying about the Longview case in particular, or just about their knowledge of your association with the FBI?
Their knowledge of my association with the FBI throughout this period.
Uh-huh. I want to get to that conspiracy to commit felony murder and bombing, but let's wait and take it chronologically. The other thing that you did learn about during your stay at the office,
right, is the Mayday 8.
This is all in a 10-day span. You gathered information about 3 different cases.
Right.
Okay.
In the Mayday 8 case, 8 individuals were charged with arson and destruction in excess of $100 of a federal property, to wit, the University of Washington ROTC building for the Air Force, that occurred on May 1st, 1970. During the last few days of September 1970, I overheard conversations between Michael Abels, a defendant in that case, and his attorney, American Civil Liberties Union attorney Michael Rosen, and reported that information to Bert Carter also on October 12th, as stated in an affidavit of April 2nd this year. As a result of my executing the affidavit in front of defense attorney Jeff Steinborn, a conference was held between Jeff Steinborn on April 2nd this year with U.S. Attorney Stan Pitkin, at which the U.S. Attorney agreed to dismiss with prejudice 12 federal felony indictments against 8 individuals in that case, if I would keep quiet, if Steinborn would keep quiet. We made such an agreement, and in Judge William H. Goodwin's Federal District Court on April 8, 1971, 12 federal felony indictments were dismissed in that case at the request of the U.S. government in a petition okayed by Attorney General John N. Mitchell. It was a motion. It was made by a motion without comment, without reason publicly stated. But that was the agreement that was made at that time, and as soon as those 12 felony indictments had been dismissed without stated cause, I began to surface within newspapers and television stations around the country and so forth to tell them what had happened. As a result of that, information began in the middle of May. Finally, after over a month of investigation by people from Associated Press, Seattle Post-Intelligencer, television station locally, and NBC News TV, and which on June 1st ran a long account on NBC Nightly News of the conspiracy to bomb and commit felony murder, and since been run on national education television. After being confirmed by, I should again add, police officers still on duty. Mm-hmm. And this, anybody can say nay that I am a liar, and I don't ask for anybody's trust. I'm simply asking them to listen to the evidence of other witnesses.
Your work in the Defense Committee office was in late September and early October of last year.
Right.
Now, you still spent another 2 months associated with the FBI before you severed that relationship.
Right.
What happened in those last 2 months?
I was asked by the FBI, specifically Bert Carter, special agent and working out of the Seattle office, to commit a violent felony crime. He said it was definitely necessary to establish my credibility as a violent revolutionary. I would need to commit a crime, a violent felony crime. He advised me to keep it in an area where it would be under F.B.I. jurisdiction, to keep it away from alcohol, tobacco, firearm jurisdiction, and jurisdiction of the Seattle police, to inform him about it and so forth. As a result, in late October, I began to hector people about that I had met 5 people who claimed to be revolutionaries, that if they were really revolutionaries, they ought to be doing a violent action. I finally convinced a group of people, these 5, to work with me to set up a bombing. At the same time, this is all being carried out with the knowledge, encouragement of Bert Carter of the FBI. A police officer, David E. Franklin, in Seattle, was acting as an intermediary. All discussions that Carter had to go to me went through Franklin. Everything I had to say to Carter went through Franklin, so that I would have a backup in the event something went wrong.
Did they tell you specifically what kind of violent action to do, or
yes,
what the site of the bombing should be specifically?
We planned it out mutually, that is, the FBI and I.
What did you decide to do?
To bomb the Evergreen Point Bridge in the city of Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Agent Bert Carter finally set the final plan as so as to not damage the bridge, conduct a bombing in which the individual who actually placed the explosive device would be killed in a booby-trapped explosion when he set the timer.
What was the explanation he gave for why that should be part of the plot?
So that the bridge would not be damaged and disrupt traffic flow, so that I would have credibility yet as a bomber, and that this individual would have died in a bombing attempt, and thus would have given pause perhaps to other bombers.
How far along did this plan proceed?
Right up until it was absolutely mapped out and ready to be set in the first week of December, and he came down with the alternative to bomb it and ensure that the individual who set the device would be killed when I severed my relationship with the FBI.
What was your reason for severing the relationship?
I did not feel it in the best interests of American government that the FBI be actually conducting bombing operations. And the reasons go a great deal deeper than that, but motivation is a subject of my actions, my motivation for leaving the FBI, and motivation for coming forward is an area that's at this point a little difficult to talk about, because it was finally in April 2nd in 1971 that I came forward, approximately 4 months after I left the Bureau, and decided to make what I had done public so that the people in the United States could be informed of what was going on. And meantime, I was looking into other parts of the country. As a result of my investigations, other individuals have come forward and confessed their involvement in violent crimes for the FBI. Specifically, Jeff Desmond on July 12th came forward, testified to directing 2 bombings for the FBI that occurred in the Seattle area.
He was another one of the men who was on the NET program with Paul Jacobs.
Right. He confessed there to bombing on March 3rd, 1970, the U.S. Post Office at 43rd University Way Northeast in Seattle, Washington. Your listeners will want to know, well, so what? Anybody can confess. He could be a nut. I could be a nut. What does it mean? In his case, it was rather interesting. You've here in the studio information from newspaper sources and so forth that at approximately 10 o'clock on the night of March 3rd, 1970, Jeff Desmond, along with John Van Veenendaal, Jan Tissot, and Mike Reed, were arrested in the act of bombing that U.S. Post Office. The bomb went off. They were arrested at the spot. They were observed throwing the bomb, etc., by approximately 12 staked-out Seattle police officers. Jeff Desmond was arrested at the site of the bombing with the other 3. The other 3 conspirators were held on $25,000 cash bail. Jeff Desmond was released within hours of his arrest, very quietly on personal recognizance. Later, all charges against him were quietly dropped. Jeff Desmond was spirited away from the Seattle area, where there was considerable hostility against him in the radical community. Jeff Desmond was never tried, was never prosecuted, was never indicted for bombing in which he was caught in the act of a U.S. Post Office, I should reiterate. And the 3 individuals who went with Jeff, who Jeff talked into going along with him, all served time in federal prison at McNeil Island for that bombing. Mm-hmm. Jeff never testified in their trials. They all pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting the manufacture of an explosive device. Jeff never acted as a state's witness. There was no attempt by the state to claim that he had turned state's evidence. Until this day, today, the Seattle police, the FBI, disclaim all knowledge of Jeff. They deny that he was ever an undercover operative for them. They deny all association with him. And you have only to think in your own mind and just try and come up with an explanation that would tell any man of reason why an individual could be caught in the act of a bombing, which he's confessed to, and never indicted, while those who went with him all serve federal time. And this is something Jeff also confessed to the February 20th, 1970 bombing. It was widely heralded in Seattle as a bombing in which radicals were attempting to kill police officers. Since there were two bombs involved, one set to go off later than the other, the second bomb failed to explode, but the first bomb exploded. The University of Washington Architecture Building caused great community upset at students and radicals in the area, etc. Jeff has confessed to that bombing in a sworn affidavit made in front of legal counsel. He can describe precisely the details surrounding that bombing. He can and has precisely described to police agencies in the Seattle area the exact constituents of that explosive device, how they were arranged, wrapped, packaged, and where they were left, exactly on that architecture building site. And yet, I just cannot buy an arrest for Jeff Desmond. He's attempted to become indicted. The government refuses to indict him. They refuse to arrest him for that bombing. And he can precisely show that he is in fact guilty of it. There is a reason that Desmond has not been arrested for those two bombings. He was working also for Agent Lewis Harris of the Seattle office of the FBI, specifically assigned to doing bombings for the FBI.
And he's so stated on television.
And he is so stated on national education television, other national news media, and so forth. There has been no refutation of that by the FBI. There can be no refutation because they would somehow have to make a friendly alteration of history. And I submit that this is not yet the Soviet Union where they can remake history with ease.
Your affidavit will be considered in court next week sometime.
Yes, that is true.
That will really be the first test in public court of the acceptability of your affidavit as evidence against the FBI.
Right.
Two questions. First of all, who will testify in support of that? And secondly, if it does succeed, what will the corollary effects of that be?
Well, initially, let me explain what is needed in terms of proof to sustain the affidavit. It must be found by
I think we should back up and reiterate that this is an affidavit concerning your activities in overhearing the
right.
attorney-client conversations in the Longview case and reporting them to the FBI.
Right.
Okay.
All right. What must be demonstrated is that I was, in fact, an undercover informant for the FBI prior to the events that took place, allegedly, that the alleged events did take place, and that I was an agent of the FBI after the events took place and could have reported those events. U.S. Attorney Stan Pitkin, on May 25th, in a public statement, established the fact that I was an undercover operative before and after the alleged events took place. Michael Tiger, UCLA law professor, and a number of other people have submitted affidavits attesting to the fact that the events took place on October 5th as I have described them. A conversation in which the defendants admitted confidentially to their legal counsel, Michael Tiger, that they were in fact guilty. This is obviously prejudicial to a man's defense, so forth. But that is all that must be demonstrated to demonstrate conspiracy to obstruct justice and to gain a directed dismissal in that case for that individual and create a situation in which bombing convictions for 4 other people would be overturned. Also, if my affidavit is upheld in that case, the contempt citations would probably be overturned immediately against the Seattle 8 by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on the same grounds. Also, there would be immediate prima facie evidence that would be more than sufficient for a bill of information indictment against FBI agents and myself for obstruction of justice. And there's be absolutely superb reason for the federal Western District judges in the state of Washington to convene a federal grand jury with a special prosecutor to investigate bombing, terrorism by the FBI, and obstruction of justice by them.
Do you believe that it's likely that A, your affidavit will be accepted, or B, that such a grand jury will be convened, or that C, indictments against the FBI will actually come down?
Superb legal counsel indicates to me, as well as the fact, the many postponements by the federal government of the actual trial date of this case, that in fact it is a shoo-in, that the court will decide the affidavit is valid. Basically, on the grounds that there are sufficient witnesses to come forward and testify to it, of incredibly reputable character, including police officers testifying against the FBI, and then myself testifying to obstruction of justice, which is a felony. I believe it carries a 10-year maximum sentence. So it's an issue that I forced into court, and either, I have two ways to go. I either can put myself in federal prison for perjury, which is a much shorter sentence, or take the longer sentences by confessing to 3 counts of obstruction of justice, conspiracy to incite to riot, conspiracy to bomb, conspiracy to commit felony murder, and bring in police and other witnesses to back it up. We may even subpoena U.S. Attorney Stan Pitkin to verify his public remarks on May 25th, but I don't think that would be required at all. It's just something that would lend interesting credibility to my case, to have the U.S. Attorney come in and be forced as a hostile witness to testify on my behalf.
Obviously, there's a certain amount of personal risk involved for law enforcement officers, agents, to come forward and discuss secret activities they've been involved in. You've got 3 officers from the Seattle Police Department who are willing to do that. Do you have any idea why they're willing to do that?
Well, basically, because one of them is an honest man, and the other 2 are in a position because of that they've little choice. One of them is a very honest and courageous individual who does not believe that the FBI should be conducting a program of bombing and terrorism.
Over the last hour or so, you've said several times that the FBI is conducting and instigating a series of political bombings throughout this country. Would you care to speculate about why the FBI would be doing that?
Well, first let me establish a little more clearly that such things have been occurring. I also report on national education television, and something will be a subject brought up at the Princeton conference this weekend that I am attending on the FBI, is a case of Charles Grimm. Charles Grimm has testified to several arsons that he committed at the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa during the Cambodia-Kent State period last year.
Was he also on the NET program?
Yes.
He was the third man on the NET
He was the third man on the program. He has confessed publicly to a series of arsons for the FBI. If you've been following the Los Angeles Times series, it's been breaking, and I believe will be in Newsweek within the week. And other papers has been in the New York Times. Louis Tackwood in Los Angeles has confessed to being involved in the setting up of bombings, murder, and planting of evidence in fraudulent manner on individuals since 1962 for federal authorities, Los Angeles Police Department. In our own city, Alfie Burnett has come forward and sworn an affidavit setting up an individual named Larry Ward, May 15th bombing, 1970, in which we are hopeful that felony murder conspiracy indictments will be brought against FBI agent Stephen Travis and others in a case in which he was set up, that is Larry Ward, and murdered. A coroner's jury has brought back a death by criminal means at the hands of police. There's been no action to indict yet, but we hope through public exposure and possibly through congressional investigation to bring these to light in such a manner as prosecutions will have to be brought, as an investigation by grand jury will be forced. And that is part of the pattern that has been developing. People coming forward, there'll be some other people coming forward to testifying to criminal activities at the Princeton conference this weekend. Others we've been developing and checking out with help of news media people and others across the country will also be brought out within the next few months.
Having established that pattern,
Right.
could you try to, well, at least present your own
Right.
theory about why the
My
FBI
own-
is involved in this stuff?
My own knowledge of it is that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, along with other federal law enforcement agencies, has been involved in a campaign of bombing, arson, and terrorism in order to create in the mass public mind an image of political dissidents of whatever stripe and revolutionaries of whatever violent tendency in one lump group. That in order to create in the public mind an image of an anti-war demonstrator, a racial injustice demonstrator, and a bomb thrower as one and the same potentially or in fact, and to create in the public mind an acceptance of whatever means deemed necessary by federal authorities to stifle political dissent, racial dissent, and to stifle reforms that might be brought about by politically dissident groups in this country. I think that is very directly the purpose and part of the broad purpose of the FBI and other federal law enforcement agencies in the political area, to protect the status quo by whatever means necessary and to gain public acceptance of a selective police state tactics to be used against certain segments of our society, the young, the poor, the black, and other racial minorities.
Do you believe that this is a conscious plan for this particular reason?
I think
at some
very
level
definitely at the highest
national
levels
administration?
of our administration.
Could you give us some information about the way the intelligence apparatus in this country operates, specifically how large the intelligence community is, how many people there are in this country who are engaged in the kind of activities you were engaged in, and what sort of things they're doing, things we may not know?
Well, that's a pretty tall order. Obviously, I'm not privy to the National Intelligence Review Board meetings. I've never been invited, and I doubt that such an invitation will soon be sent. However, I can state that stolen Media Pennsylvania documents and other similar FBI documents and testimony of former special agents of the Federal Bureau, some of which will be brought forward this weekend at the Princeton Conference on the FBI, demonstrate that each agent of the FBI, and there are nearly 10,000 now, are encouraged to have 12 informants as a quota minimum in various types of activity. Political surveillance and intelligence gathering is the preeminent job of the FBI right now. That's where their real energies are directed. And so there are some authorities have estimated at least 30,000 informants in all types who have been planted in all types of activities of all types of political and racial natures that are outside of traditional Democratic Republican politics. and that these are operating right now. And that's just with the FBI. The Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms Division of the Internal Revenue Service has an enormous number of agents who act as undercover operatives in political cases. The Bureau of Drug Abuse Control has its own informant system. Police departments all across the country and state policeman departments all across the country have their own undercover operatives and informants. And so there is, in fact, an incredibly large network of such people. The Central Intelligence Agency operates in a very big way in the United States, unbeknownst to the majority, perhaps, of our people, with undercover operatives and informant networks.
Mm-hmm. With so many undercover informants in the country, would it be safe to assume that most so-called movement groups in large cities are infiltrated in one way or another by informants?
Oh, certainly, in large cities and small. I mean, this has been brought out by the Stolen Media Pennsylvania F.B.I. records that every black student union in every college in the United States has been targeted. They must infiltrate it. This sort of thing. Every ghetto area, every political group of almost every type is infiltrated, and they're very high priority for this, and they're willing to pay very large amounts of money to infiltrate every type of political group.
Speaking of large amounts of money, were you paid for your work with the FBI?
Initially, I was offered $750 a week a month, and expenses. I declined that and all subsequent offers of financial payment. I was employed quite well at the time, and I felt that it was simply a patriotic duty and one that I could afford.
So you worked for that 6 month period or so as a volunteer, essentially?
Right, without pay.
Right. I want to close this interview on sort of a more individual note and talk about the psychology of undercover agents and what leads people to do that sort of thing, from not only your own personal experience but from your contact with other people. How do these people operate? What motivates them, and how can they be recognized as well?
The vast majority of undercover informants are gained, whether it be by the New York City Police or the Federal Bureau of Investigation or any other police or federal law enforcement agency, under compulsion. The favorite tactic is to have felony charges available to be pressed against an individual and encourage him to accept a job as an undercover informant rather than be indicted. Or they love to get narcotics addicts, and they love to get people with criminal backgrounds who have charges that could be brought against them successfully. This is one of the major motives, and this is the modus operandi of the informant system, if you could call it that. The other is to get people who are patriotically motivated in some ways that they regard that there is genuinely a threat to our survival as a democratic nation posed by radicals and revolutionaries, and so that they will cooperate without money. And there are all types of people who are thus in it for a variety of reasons. Mm-hmm. Some for money, some so that they participate in secret knowledge and so forth, others to gain approval and self-aggrandizement. There's just a wide variety of reasons, healthy and sick, that put people in police-type activities, that put them further into espionage-type activities. Mm-hmm. It'd be very hard to generalize without, a very long academic studies, very thorough nature.
Is there any way that you know of that any common quality perhaps that undercover agents have that make them recognizable?
No. If they did have such, obviously it'd be exploited and there'd be no such thing happening. Now, I don't think that they could be recognized or picked out by any special means, or they simply wouldn't function were that possible. They could be anybody. They could be anywhere around us. It might even be you.
We've been talking for the last hour or so with David Sanis, who spent 8 months working for the FBI in Seattle, Washington, and the surrounding area, and now is discussing publicly his activities as an informant, as an agent provocateur, as a conspirator to obstruct public justice, and to almost commit a bombing and felonious murder. There will be a conference this weekend in Princeton, New Jersey, concerning the FBI and its activities, sponsored by the Committee for Public Justice, one of whose leaders is Ramsey Clark. David Sanis will be testifying at that conference, and we'll be covering it here on WBAI. For the Public Affairs Department, this is Bruce Soloway. Good night.